everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today I thought I'd show you how I make my little organic stitch pots. These beautiful, soft, organic little textile pieces of loveliness that I make using from all of my old pieces of fabric that I'm no longer using in my bigger projects. It's a great way for me to use up a lot of the eco-steamed, rust-dyed fabric that I've got left over. And there's something really satisfying and beautiful about making these lovely little stitch pots. There's not a lot that you will need for these pots, just a few pieces of material, some cotton. I use the DMC embroidery cotton, and a pair of scissors. Now for my fabric pieces, these are pieces of bits of t-shirts or bits of old sheets that I've picked up in the recycling bin at my resource center. I try to do a gradient of color, so I'll use a darker gradient of, say, orange on the base of my pots, and then gradually sew in some of the lighter tones, so you've got this beautiful gradient effect, like on this little one, the darker at the bottom and then slowly moving up to the lighter material at the top. So let's get started on the materials and how we actually make these little pots. So I'll start with my darker pieces of material first and simply cut them into some thin strips. Now, I don't measure them, they're quite jagged, they're not all exactly the same size as each other, but I don't really mind. I simply start snipping away and, as I said, just cutting some smaller thin strips along the length, the longer length of the piece of fabric. I mean, we're simply tying the lengths of fabric together, so it doesn't really matter how long your strips are. You will just have more knots in the sides of your pot, which I really love, when you've got shorter pieces of material. So as I said, I simply cut a whole heap of strips like this, lay them all out, and I will then start knotting them together. Just a simple knot, and knotting them and tightening them up. If I've got any excess fabric on the end of the knot, I'll trim it down a little bit. But as you can see, I've kept quite a hefty knot in it, and I'll just go along, maybe do 4 at a time, and then I'll simply add, this will be the line that I will be feeding around the pot as I stitch, so I'll simply add more strips of fabric as I use it up as my pot grows. So as I said, I'm just going to join a heap together, and that's really what is going to be making our beautiful soft fabric vessels. Trim this one off, he's a little bit excessive there. So I've got one long line. Actually, I might just cut this larger label off. I've got one long line of fabric strips. So I'm going to just pop these to the side. So I do things a little bit differently, I'm sure, than what you've seen in coil pots or raffia pots. I simply decide right at the beginning, do I want a circle pot or a rectangular pot? Now, if I want a circular pot, I'll just curl a piece of material around like that. So I've got like a rough circle, and I will stitch it all together just to make a nice solid little circle to start building around. For these pots, I like to do a rectangular pot right at the beginning. So it gives me that nice organic shape that I love so much. So what I end up doing is I'll start with the end, and I will just fold it over a couple of times, so maybe 3 times. So I've got this rough rectangle shape, and that will be the start of my base. So I'm going to grab my embroidery thread. It's just a single embroidery thread. You can do double if you like. The single is fine. This one's a little bit thicker. And I'm just going to stitch through all the 3 folds together, so it's just a nice solid fold to start with. So I'm not after, particularly, uniform stitches. I just want to stitch these 3 folds together, just really to keep it together, and then I can start sewing around it. I'm trying to capture the 3 in one stitch and then just coming up and back through. I'm pressing on the table because the rust dye on this material, it's a little bit hard to stitch through sometimes, and my needle is of course a little bit blunt from overuse. So I just go the length of that fold there. So these were my 3 folded together, and that will form, I mean, it doesn't look the tidiest thing at the moment, but that will form the start of my base. So then now all it is a matter of, this is my line of scraps that I have knotted together. I'm going to grab one end, twist it, because I like to twist it because it gives it a nice visual effect along the side of the pot. Now I'm going to just simply start stitching. So I'm going to go up into this, which I'll call the tail. I'm going to go up into the tail and bring it down into my rectangle base. So up and into my base. So as you can see, I'm joining it together. It just starts stitching it as I go up and down into my rectangle. And I will continue along the end, one edge around the side and back the other edge, and then continue until I've got a big enough base. So as you can see, it's quite a simple, oops, it's just got caught. Quite a simple stitch, twisting my material as I go. So capturing the tail and just sewing it then into that rectangle of fabric that we first made. This one here, and then through. Twisting the material as I go. This is a really soft t-shirty type fabric, which is lovely to use. So I'm calling this my tail, so up through the tail, then into the side of the rectangle, for an easy way to describe it. So as you can see, it's starting to form a little bit of a shape now. I've circled the rectangle once. I've done a whole lap of the rectangle, and I'm going to simply continue on going around and around the rectangle until, as I said, my base is large enough. So you might notice we've reached our first knot. So what I tend to do with the knots is I'll continue to sew until I reach it, and then I will simply sew along the bottom of the knot. Now you're going to reach a point where you feel that the base is big enough. So I'm pretty much there at the moment, but I thought I'd give you a look at how it's changed as I've continued to sew these circles around the rectangle. This was the original rectangle that I did, folded those scrap pieces of fabric up and made that 3-fold rectangle. So as you can see, I've traveled around the rectangle, stitching along as I go. I used all 4 of my tied pieces of fabric strips. So I've just tied in a few more strips. What you've noticed as well, now that the stitches are starting, you can see the language of the stitches starting to appear as the color of the stitching sits alongside of the orange, which looks really lovely. And then of course the randomness of the stitching as well. Now that's not really done purposefully. As I said, I'm just not too concerned with, you know, having uniform stitches or keeping them in line with each other. But what happens a lot is that these areas here, these bigger circle areas, these are the knots that I've sewn in to the base. And of course, I've sewed underneath the knots and then over the top of the knots when I've done another round over them. So it's created this visual difference with not only the shape of the material, but also how the stitches have traveled around the knot, which I find really appealing because it looks, to my mind, it's that landscape feel, that organic shape feel that I'm really after when I make these vessels. So I'm looking at this base and saying, you know what, it's pretty much the size that I want the base now. So I'm going to have a look at how am I going to then start creating the walls, which is exactly the same as the base, but with one slight difference. Whereas, I'll just move this out the way, whereas before I've used the material alongside each other and sewed them together, when I want to form the base, I'm going to just slightly layer this new tail on top of the previous one. So it's going to start pulling up over the sides, and that way I guess I can start to suggest the direction for the vessel. Now, it's going to have a mind of its own sometimes regardless of what I do, but I know by slightly overlapping this tail rather than sitting it side by side, I'm going to get a direction upwards rather than a flat direction, which is good for the base. So I'm going to continue along with that, and I'll show you in a little while, once I've done a few more layers of starting to pull up on the sides, how it starts to look. But as I said, it's really just a matter of grabbing your material. Instead of stitching side by side, I'm going to twist it and just push it up a little bit over the one below it so it starts to pull up on the edges. So as you can see, even a few lines in from what I showed you last time, just laying them on top of the previous row rather than side by side, it started to pull up the basket already, or the vessel. So it's already starting to form those sides that we're after, which is, it's a really lovely manipulative way of, I guess, having a little bit of control in the type of shape that you want in your vessel. You could slightly adjust the next row out a little bit so it starts to flare out, or just gather it in a little more and it continues to form almost a dome shape, which is really interesting as well. So it's just a little bit that you can play with to gain a little bit of control over the direction that your vessel goes in. the vessel's almost finished. What I'm doing is, the higher that the walls are getting on the vessel, I'm starting to pull in the material, see this little tail, into the middle more, so it's narrowing that hole at the top, which gives it, of course, that beautiful shape as well. And I might make mention too, I'm just going to take the needle out, about halfway through I ended up flipping it inside out and working on the outside of it, because as you'll notice that both sides have totally different looks. This one's a lot more, you can see the colour of it a lot more and the stitches a lot less. So you might prefer that look on your vessel, or you can flip them inside out like I did and keep it looking at like that type of vessel. That one's got, you can see more of the stitches on it. Either way, they look beautiful. It's just really up to preference. I'm almost finished now though, as I said. I'm going to just sew in this little tail and probably call it done. It's about the size and the height that I want to match this other little guy. They sit so beautifully together, and I'm really liking that tone of orange come through from slightly darker at the bottom and then middle tones, and then using that whiter, almost bone beige fabric at the top. So I've got that lovely tonal look on it. But that's it, and I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and I really encourage you to make your own little vessels. They take quite a while to make, as you can imagine, if you look at how many stitches are in the vessels themselves, but I find it really relaxing, and I really enjoy these beautiful organic shapes that I can get from sewing these types of soft fabric vessels.